I will start off. My name is Steve Bohlen. I lead the Energy and Homeland Security program at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab. All I can say is that my job is interesting, but most of the things that I work on, I wish I didn't have to. The world is an ugly place. But I do want to talk about a unifying theme for much of what we've talked about this morning, and to really, I hope, put it in a framework that allows Kern County and the southern San Joaquin to think about its future in a very positive way. I think that California, being the 5th largest economy on the planet, most of what happens here will scale around the world, not everything. We have some advantages and some disadvantages. But I really honestly believe that the San Joaquin Valley, especially the southern San Joaquin, can be the next valley of innovation in the state. And I hope to convince you of that in just a few minutes. To begin with, you have an enormous set of advantages. You have abundant renewable energy. You have a powerful oil and gas industry, even though in California the narrative is we hate this industry. In fact, they need it every moment of every day. And getting people to understand that we're not going to get away from oil and gas for the foreseeable future. We're talking a few decades, if not more than a few. You have an abundance of talent and good universities, and you have agriculture. But with each of these, the kids want to go to the city and work for Google. I don't know why, but they do. The oil and gas industry is an industry that an awful lot of people in this state love to hate. What do we do with ag waste and so forth? Each of these presents very intractable problems that appear to be intractable. And in fact, I hope to convince you that they are opportunities. So what's the major opportunity? The major opportunity is that you have abundant renewable energy, and the cost of that energy is going down very rapidly. 2 and 3 cent solar and wind is now a reality. That's an all-in price, levelized cost of electricity. That's not subsidized. And we think those curves for wind and solar will continue to go up. So right now you can get about 25 kilowatt hours for $1 investment in wind and solar, and we think that'll get cheaper. And that's the key to the future. A big challenge. The state wants to be carbon neutral by 2045. Half the carbon emissions in the state are related in some way to transportation, the development of oil and gas, the refining of oil and gas, and tailpipe emissions. So that's a huge challenge. Now, the state doesn't have an answer for that. And they realized that, so they created the low carbon fuel standard. This is something that was viewed by suspicion for a long time by the oil and gas industry, and yet I think will provide the financial incentives for the emergence of the oil and gas industry as a critical industry for managing carbon in the state. So here's what the state has signed up to do. It has signed up to be carbon neutral by 2045. That's an aspirational goal because of an executive order issued by Governor Brown in September before he left office. The challenge is that if we decarbonize the electric grid, do a lot of other decarbonizing, our analysis shows that the state will be short by about 100 million tons of CO2 emissions, short of carbon neutrality. So how do we get there? This is where I think the innovation in the Central Valley comes in because of your assets. You have the opportunity to turn ag waste into fuels, and that's everything from hydrogen to liquid fuels. Those technologies exist. We heard that earlier this morning. The challenge is now scaling them. Turning CO2 into products. This is technologies that are coming rapidly. I will talk a little bit about those. And the third is putting CO2 underground. We are just finishing a report funded by the Hewlett Foundation. It's getting to neutral. I call this the no miracles, no kidding, let's get down to reality, path to carbon neutral. It's science-based, it's thoroughly researched, it's in review right now, and it'll be out in January. And there's no path in this state that gets the state to carbon neutral without significant geologic sequestration of CO2. I am a geologist. I understand the rocks of this state, just like Trem Smith. The great thing about California is it is the Saudi Arabia of pore space. You have young basins, you have large volumes of pore space that can store CO2, and we know that CO2 stays underground once it's put there. It's actually a lot like oil, and I'll talk about that in a minute. New products from CO2. This is a very hot area. Essentially, this is taking inexpensive renewable electricity, adding it to CO2 from someplace, could be from a refinery, could be from separating the digester gas, separating the methane and CO2 and so forth, and then upgrading it into a variety of products. We already have copper catalysts that make ethylene. Ethylene is one of the biggest markets for a C2 chained molecule on the planet. We can make methane and so forth. The challenge is creating a catalyst that optimizes a single product or one or two products. Right now it makes several. That has to do with how you print the catalyst into an optimized reactor and scaling that to scale. That's active work. Shell Oil company, a company you might know, is putting $1 billion into this research and spending some of that at Livemore, actually. So this is the future. We will make products. We will make carbon chain products, lubricants, fuels, and so forth out of CO2 eventually. This is the future. This is an area of enormous innovation and opportunity for the Central Valley where the CO2 is. Biomass, converting biomass to a variety of fuels, hydrogen, liquid fuels, biodiesel, and so forth. You have the benefit of having your next door neighbor, Fresno, and you have the largest amounts of biomass waste in the state. The great thing about converting biomass to fuel is that if you separate the CO2 out of the gases that come off, you can bury that and you actually then make these fuels carbon negative. So this is a huge opportunity. The technologies exist. It's all about the regulatory framework and organizing that, lowering regulatory risk, and then scaling this in a way that the industry learns and gets more efficient and effective and cost competitive. This is something that's coming. It's a little bit farther behind. Essentially, the big pole in the tent is, can we put carbon back into soils? Modern agricultural processes have burned about 500 billion tons of carbon out of soils over what they were about 100 years ago. And the issue is, can we put it back? Why this is important and why the Central Valley may be the place of innovation is that getting the plants to put carbon and fix carbon deep in soils in semi-arid environments is the most important thing for the planet. We may be able to store, as it says here, upwards of several 100 million tons of CO2 in soils and keep it there. The science is not as mature as the other things I've talked about, but this is the place to do it. CO2 storage. As I said earlier, there's no path to carbon neutral by 2045 that does not require significant amounts of carbon sequestration, geologic sequestration. The same industry that produces oil in this state is the very same industry that is needed to put CO2 underground. In fact, as I've said to a number of you in this room, the first step is to start putting CO2 underground to lower the carbon intensity of the oils produced in California so that the industry can say on a quantitative basis that you are helping the state with its goal to carbon neutrality by 2045. California has enormous amounts of pore space by virtue of its young basins. We think that you could easily put 100 million tons of CO2 underground in this state as an industry and make money. The reason is a ton of CO2 underground is worth $200 in the low carbon fuel standard credit market right now. I'm a scientist, and so for all you businessmen, you're probably sitting there saying, yeah, you're a scientist with your head in the clouds, which of course is a euphemism for where you think my head really is. But we think there is a path ahead for this. And CO2 is actually, supercritical CO2 is very much like oil. You get it underground and it's going to stay there. So longer term, we're talking decades ahead, the sunset of the oil age, which I think will eventually happen. There are a few things that have to happen before that. We have to have hugely better storage, energy storage capabilities. Battery technology has to improve, on and on and on. Lithium-ion batteries are wonderful if you can afford a Tesla, but we're all not going to be driving around with a 2,000-pound battery in our car. It's just not going to happen. The energy density of lithium-ion batteries is not up to the challenge of electrifying our transportation sector. But CO2, managing CO2 is in my mind, the future of this valley, Southern San Joaquin. I think you are the next Silicon Valley. You haven't realized it yet. It's around managing carbon, starting to develop a mindset around a county that manages carbon effectively for the future is one that will bring investment, I believe, in these areas that I've just talked about. Catalytic conversion of CO2, industrial scale bio-waste to fuels, and carbon sequestration are huge industries waiting to be built. Thank you.
I'm Sarge Green, and you might wonder why an ag water guy is here at an energy conference. But I would pose to you that food is also energy. And the San Joaquin Valley is very good at it. But we're also facing a lot of challenges in continuing to produce that food. And we've got a lot of links with the energy industry in terms of water as well. So I'm going to try and give you a little perspective as to why all this is important. Number one is, in terms of water and food, the World Economic Forum a number of years ago, 2015 I recall, established that water and food are two of the highest risks in our entire globe. Water is really high because globally, over half of the population is at risk of not having enough water. 4 billion people are in water shortage areas. And we got 7.7 now, 7.7 billion people. So water is important and food is important. Food is important, especially areas like the San Joaquin Valley, because not many people know, but out of the arable land that we grow crops on over the globe, 20% of it is irrigated, but that 20% produces almost 50% of our food now. Irrigation is a control strategy to produce more food. When you're at the mercy of nature in rain-fed areas, you don't know whether you're going to get a crop or not. But at least with irrigation, you have one important component to be able to grow that food. So it's pretty darn important in terms of our area being probably the #1 producing area in the world. And so water becoming our risk factor now is got the potential then to limit potentially global food production. So it's a pretty big deal. And how do we get our water? I think you probably know most of the water and the rain falls in the northern part of our state. And a lot of it is not capturable. That stuff out on the north coast up there, it goes straight out to the ocean. We capture a little bit from Lake Shasta up there in the Trinity and Northern Cascades, And then the Northern Sierras, that's where all our major water projects start their water from. The Central Valley Project is Lake Shasta, and the State Water Project is the Feather River system up above Oroville. Run it down into the Delta, we pump it out and bring it down here, all the way then down to Southern California. We get quite a bit of rain and snow in the mountains. That's a little suspect these days, especially with climate change. We don't know whether we're going to have more rain and more intense rainfall, or whether we're going to be able to maintain our snowpack. Our snowpack is our #1 storage system in California. We've got to have snow to be able to have it melt off slowly to fill our reservoir slowly. So that adds another factor in terms of uncertainty in the future. The other thing that people don't know is our variability. It's the highest in the entire country. You can see on here the dark colors represent a 70% level of uncertainty. So we in California have the most variability in our availability of precipitation and hence water. So that makes it for a very interesting place to try and manage of all these things. It results then in variable hydrology. We know we just came through a very major drought a few years ago. In fact, it's the one that broke open the policy bank, and we now have the Groundwater Sustainability Act that I'm going to talk about, because we got our groundwater levels down to the lowest they've ever been. That was really the thing that probably triggered it the most, is that we have continuously drained our groundwater down, and I've got another graph to show that. And this is the overall water budget. We have so much coming in, and we import quite a bit here into the San Joaquin Valley. We still do. A lot of people don't know that, but we get quite a bit of water from that north area. We have a lot of native water, but the budget is showing for a very long time that we have been deficit spending. We've been drawing that groundwater account down. So, these are the factors then that are affecting water supply in California, and especially the San Joaquin Valley. The population is still increasing here, and people have to drink water, so we've got competition. We've got aging infrastructure. A lot of the water systems are 100 years old. Even the relatively new stuff, like Oroville, you saw what happened up there. The flood control chute broke during the wet year of 2017. It failed because the underpinning was not very good. The soils weren't adequately investigated, and it eroded out underneath, and it got pounded and broken up. I actually got to visit it last year. We have an organization at CSU called WRPI, and it's all the campuses that have water people, and we meet, and we got to go there and see the replaced, but we also got to see paradise, and that was not a fun thing. So, and the follow-up water problem up there is they still not get good drinking water. That fire burnt the pipes and put organics into the drinking water system. So a lot happens when we have these catastrophic fires. It's something that we share in terms of a risk throughout our, whatever your energy portfolio is. Groundwater overdraft is obviously the biggest thing that I'm going to talk about mostly on with the San Joaquin Valley. We've got conflict, and we've got the uncertainty of climate. What do we have to do? It's more collaboration. And that's something that we're going to share with you, that the energy business and ag have some capabilities, I think, to collaborate. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, because we do share some water issues, but I think we really share that communications issue. We cannot continue to be separate, even in the San Joaquin Valley. If you look at our production as a whole, the valley is one of the most important places, but too often we parse it from one area to another. I won't parse it. I think we have to stick together as an entire San Joaquin Valley to support agriculture and the energy business as well. So I won't mention which county or which area produce more. We're a valley of tribes, and we've got to get over that. And the water business is just as guilty. We still don't have a complete membership of the Frank-Kern Water Authority. There's still separate agencies that are trying to manage the same water. It should be all one organization again. So we get back to one of the big elephants in our water room, and that's the Delta. Can we continue to get imports? One of the big messages is that we never communicate very well is the areas on the coast that are also dependent on the Delta. They don't even realize it. especially the Bay Area. The Bay Area, 30% of their water comes from the Delta, the North Bay Aqueduct, the South Bay Aqueduct, out of San Luis Reservoir over to Santa Clara Valley Water District. There's a lot of water that moves to the Bay Area that has to go through the Delta. So it's in everybody's interest in the state of California to solve the problems of the San Francisco Bay and Sacramento San Joaquin Delta. Whether it's salmon, Delta smelt, whatever it is, it has to be an all-in case of everybody working to solve those problems. And there's some pretty good news. Those new biological opinions that some people are complaining about are actually a new adaptive procedure. It was, the way it was designed originally in the 2009 era was we ran the pumps based on the calendar, not where the fish were, but the calendar, because they expected the fish to be here at this month, at this time. Well, now we're running it much more adaptively. We've got a lot of new data, and we're watching and actually seeing where the fish are. And so we can turn the pumps off and on a lot more reliably. It still may mean they be off for a long time and not necessarily get us the water, but at least we've got better science to do it. Kern County, you're obviously a state water project contractor, and so you've got quite a bit of water that you import in here as well. Southern California, same way, 30% of the water comes from through the Delta. Yep, I'm stuck. There we are. I gotta go back.
Confused.
Gotta go back.
Hang on, you're going.
Am I back?
Let's go one more, I think. Okay, there you go.
There we are. So this is the graph that I mentioned. This is the one that's really hurt us. What people don't realize is that while we have lost imported water in the last decade or so, both by legislation and then by the operation of what we call the biological opinions, trying to fix the fish problem, if you look at that graph, independent of imports, the groundwater has gone down for over 100 years. As a matter of fact, ever since Worthington made the practical deep well turbine pump for agriculture. I think oil had some equipment sooner than that, but for water purposes, it was 1920 when we started pumping deep groundwater in the valley. And it's always gone down. So now we end up with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and that's where we are today, and that's why I'm here. It's in its stages of developing right now the groundwater sustainability plans. They're out. A lot of them are available for public opinion or public review, and the opinions coming from some quarters. I've seen a lot of them now, and we're getting assaulted with so many comments that are wrong, for one thing, but yet very obstructive as well, that it's going to be difficult for these plans to get finished in the time frame probably that they need to be done. They're supposed to be done by January 2020, and I can tell you that two things are going to come out of them. One is we don't have enough data to really characterize the conditions, whether it's water quality or flow in the underground. And the other is we're going to go to projects as soon as possible, and the projects are going to be groundwater recharge projects. Oh, by the way, I got to go back again.
Going forward.
And going forward, nuts. I went all the way too far back. How do you work this crazy thing? Not technology.
There you go. Go
Yeah,
forward now.
it's back. Thank you very much. I'm not that technology challenged, but sometimes you get a new one and it just doesn't fit. The last one showed the critical overdraft basins, and I was asked to comment a little bit about on the east side of Kern County. That is one of the critically overdrafted basins, and I know Lorelei was involved in a policy change that impacted the way that operates over there. I have a friend, Rod Stiefvater, that's one of the pistachio farmers, and we had to shut down a lot of the proposed agriculture on that side because the Naval Weapons Center has a critical mission in this country, and they need to protect the water supply for them. That is one, and the reason is that natural recharge is very slow over there. It's a playa desert area, so it doesn't rain very often. When it does, it comes down real hard, so it just doesn't fill. So when you cut back the amount that, how much the average native water that is contributed to that basin, it's not very much. And that's why that had to be controlled differently than perhaps some of the other basins that we're going to be talking about. But this slide shows the areas that have no surface water. And those are the areas that are going to be impacted the first and the most in terms of the groundwater sustainability plans. And it's not looking real good for those areas. And that's why when we worked on the Public Policy Institute report that I'm a co-author on, we came up with some numbers on 500,000 acres of land may need to be retired in the San Joaquin Valley. The other thing that people don't understand and know about is at the same time we're going to have to deal with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, the regulatory agency, specifically the water boards, have also come up with stiffer regulations on the irrigated lands, and it has to do with nitrogen application because we have areas in the valley that have high nitrates in the groundwater, and they adopted new water quality control plans called CV salts, which every area in the state is supposed to have a salt nutrient management plan, which are the water quality objectives. And both of them have management zones that they are choosing to be high priority areas. We're going to have management zones under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and then we have management areas with the irrigated lands and the CV salts programs. Guess what? Those are the target areas. The first of this year, the water boards are going to be imposing more controls to try and limit the amount of nitrogen that goes into the groundwater and asking for replacement water in areas that have high nitrates already. And they're also then very intimately aware of and tied into the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So the management zones there are going to have to be much more cognizant of water quality as well. And yet those are the areas that we want to do recharge. So it poses a kind of a conflict. How can we do groundwater recharge and worry about managing nitrogen going down at the same time? So the 500,000 acres I've already mentioned, much of that is likely in permanent crops that will have to come out. It will affect the valley's economy, and I think this is the big thing. It will require heretofore levels of collaboration. We'll have to work together better as a valley, especially if we want to work on sustaining or improving movement of water out of the delta. That's one of the big things that we share. But the San Joaquin Valley is not on the same page from north to south. The north end of the San Joaquin Valley is not very happy about moving water to the south. The delta area doesn't always agree with us, and yet for the rest of it, it's going to be absolutely necessary. Our native water just will not support us without having some imports. So we got to do a better job of fixing the environment and being able to move some water south. So why do we share with the water, the oil and gas industry? Water that's produced water. We hope that we can help devise and help find treatment things like Steve was talking about. We see a lot of that stuff coming through Fresno State through our Water and Energy Technology Incubator. A lot of treatment opportunities. Evapco, I don't know if you've seen that one yet, the Patey brothers out of Utah, a giant evaporation unit that seems to be working very well for produced water. So that we share that in terms of both the regulatory issues and trying to do a better job of supplying water. So if we can clean it up and share it, we have another way of adding to the water supply. And the rest of the saline water bodies in the San Joaquin Valley, same thing. We have a lot of brackish water in the San Joaquin Valley, and we need to access it to help with our water portfolio. Now, the issue then is that what we share with you is this need to communicate and collaborate. And I think we can do some partnerships with the energy business as well as with ag and water, and try and move us all together in one direction. So I think that's the opportunity. Water is in a new phase, and it will require a lot more connectivity. We'll have to work a lot better amongst each other, and those are the ones I've already talked about. The other deficiency is that we're running out of people in water. I've been around a long time. I've been around water so long, I'm rusty. So we have to have leadership, and we have to have more training people to get into the water business to help out in these issues, and the collaboration is going to have to be on a much bigger scale than we've had in the past. So the future needs improved existing conveyance is one of the big things. Like I said, in our infrastructure is old. We've got to reduce risks, and we've got to develop groundwater and surface water storage where we can, although new dams do not look like they're very promising. They're very expensive. Underground storage is going to be the preferred alternative, and it's an optimization process. Mm-hmm. we've got to optimize what we have, in fact, before we can ask for other things. And that's why we need the collaboration. We've got to show what we're doing. Efficiency is part of it. There's no question about it. But we've done a lot of calculations, and efficiency, efficiency just means water stays in the ground. That's what happens with water that ag saves in particular, is you just don't pump it out. So it slows down overdraft. I'm going to close it there. Thank you very much.
Just a quick comment. Obviously, the connection with energy and cleaning up water and energy use is a big issue. And there are new technologies coming quickly that use nanoporous materials, carbon aerogels, and so forth for selective ion removal, which would be a huge boon. If you don't have to push it through an RO membrane, and you can just take out individual ions, whether it's boron or nitrate, will both be much more energy efficient and open water that isn't currently available. So there's some exciting things coming on.
Yeah, and we want you to be successful in pushing all those in our direction so that we can commercialize them for you. That's what our Water and Energy Technology Center is about, to turn them into a business. We just had another event. In fact, I'd like to introduce Heather Peterson. She's here today. She's our program manager for the WET. We had a little contest. The winner of the contest was E. coli Sense. It's an instantaneous E. coli detection device, which is really important in food safety, but also in beach water quality and other things. And so that's kind of an example. And the way it works so far, if you want to have a test for E. coli or contamination with bacteria, you have to send it to a lab, and it takes 24 to 48 hours. So this is a game changer. People in the field can actually detect whether or not they've got contamination. But in the area of water treatment, you're absolutely right. We've seen a bunch of stuff already. Unfortunately, we weren't part of the team with LVL that won the big DOE grant, but we'll get
money.
We'll get money.
Actually, we have, since we have about 10 minutes for Q&A, is any questions? Courtney's in the back with the microphone. After the conversation, discussion, anyone have questions on carbon or water? I think you answered all the questions then, right?
I do want to, you made a comment, scaling things to industrial scale. To me, I think that's the huge opportunity here, whether it's turning CO2 to new products and fuels, whatever it is, water technologies, all of them are necessary here. All of the technology comes together here. And you've got good young people that you probably can keep here through that kind of unification. And I think that's the opportunity. It's around managing water, and it's around managing carbon. Everything that happens here and improves here will scale worldwide. That's why this could be the next valley of innovation. And I think it's important not to lose sight of that. Whether it's water, energy, carbon, it's really the same thing.
Yeah, and the other piece is the data management piece I heard earlier too. IoT has hit ag, and so that's another reason why we're keeping a lot more of our kids. And we have people coming over from Silicon Valley to bring their data platforms or data capabilities, or to integrate data, whatever it takes to give people good information almost instantaneously, whether it's to irrigate or to know whether you have pests and you need to treat it in a spot, or whether you have to treat a whole field. All those kinds of things are coming to IoT capabilities, drones, all that, and these kids are real excited about that. So the ag school and engineering school at Fresno State, for example, are filling up and got waiting lists, are impacted because the jobs out there are paying well and they're interesting to these people. It's not backbreaking labor. It's IoT.
Well, and if anyone's seen, Fresno, about 2 years ago, we took a bus up to Fresno to see the Bitwise, which you saw the announcement today where they're going, and the WET Center, Water Energy Tech Center, with Haley's team doing amazing work, 20 companies working in that space. And so how do we, our educational institutions, create the next generation of jobs? I think that's what we're really striving for, and looking at best practices throughout the region. So thank you again, you both.